Yeah.
So Yolanda is the urban ag specialist for CCE Harvest New York. So that's part of Extension. She's got her Extension slide up. And she works or she's based in New York City. So we can see your presenter view. And if you go up above where it says, sometimes it'll say change.
Change default displays.
Yeah, try that and see what options.
Okay, great.
There you go.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. So great to be with you all today. So yes, I will be presenting on non-traditional gardening, urban settings, and imported soils, as well as talking about some container options. So like Betsy said, my name is Yolanda Gonzalez. I'm an urban ag specialist with the Harvest New York program. We're located in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and we're co-located with the USDA and the Department of Agriculture and Markets. And we primarily serve commercial urban farms throughout all 5 boroughs of New York City. So an overview of my presentation, I'll be talking about some urban ag IPM considerations, some best practices for soil health, as well as getting some inspiration from some of the unique farms in New York City and their container options that they're using. So these photos right here, the top right is actually Governor's Island. That's a farm that's operated by Grow NYC. And the bottom is actually an old like tennis court or playing racket court from a school in the Bronx. It's Morris Campus Farm. And this section is, as you can see, has a mural in the background, as well as all these really great raised beds. And they provide a lot of education around the gardens. So we'll just start off with an activity. If you can type in the answer in the chat, but don't hit return until instructed to do so. It'd be nice to know kind of who's in the audience. Where are you growing right now? Do you have a backyard? Do you have a community garden or your own farm plot somewhere? It'd be great to know kind of where everybody's coming from. So I'll count down from 3, 2, 1. You can put it in the chat. Okay, backyard, raised bed, and large planters on my sunny patio. Great. Brooklyn backyard, great. Bushwick, awesome to see some New York State folks, New York City folks. Great. Raised bed at a community garden, good. Okay, great. So these 2 examples, I love to feature these 2. So this top right photo is actually Flatbush, Brooklyn. And this was at a pollinator safari. The Flatbush gardener actually hosts this as part of like Earth Week and Pollinator Week and all of that in New York City. So it's a lot of people that gather on his front yard and look at all of his native plants and take close-up photos and then also post them on iNaturalist. And then the bottom photo is actually a backyard homestead in Queens. And as you can see, it's really basic. They have a couple of trays that are up on some tables and then some hoops that they can drape over some landscape fabric to keep them warm. So a few considerations. There are some unique pest pressures and some management practices to keep in mind in New York City. If you're growing on a rooftop, like this bottom photo here, this is Hellgate Farm in Long Island City. They're growing mainly hot peppers that gets made into a hot sauce and other value-added products. They experience a lot of wind, as well as this photo here on the top right is actually Staten Island Irby Farm, and it's part of a residence building, and they also get a lot of wind. So making sure that you have buffers to kind of block out the wind, that you're hardening off your seeds, seedlings, and all of that is important. And in terms of pest pressure, we have some unique pests in New York City. For example, the Harlequin bug is a pest that we often see throughout late summer, fall, that you won't see on rural farms. And that's just part of being in a warmer climate and not necessarily overwintering as you often see in a northern climate. And again, a lack of knowledge and appropriate research. A lot of what urban farmers find is research and technical assistance that's tailored for rural farms. So our work is really trying to tailor it to an urban audience, trying to just provide appropriate research and best practices that really suit the needs of small scale growers. And so we're going to do another quick activity. I'd like you to all to just think about which of these you consider as urban pests. So we have A, rats, B, cats, C, birds, D, bats, or E, all of the above. So I'll let you all put your answers in the chat. Okay, we have some E, some A through C. The Harlequin blogs blow in. They may. Yeah, I can point that out later. Okay, so it looks like we're pretty much all on the same page. For the most part, I saw a lot of people put E. There was just recently at a food safety event, I did hear about an urban farmer having issues with bats. And in this photo right here, there's some signage to prevent dogs from doing their business on a planter there. So yeah, rats, cats, birds, bats, we get all of these different pests in New York City. Particularly for rats, that's definitely a concern. So the New York City Health Department has what's called a Rat Academy, where you could actually take classes and learn about the best ways to manage your rat population if you do have an issue on your urban farm. And Deb put that in the chat box. Thank you. And just a note, so I'll be talking about like imported soil and clean soil and all of that. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the soils that can be found in New York City have high levels of lead contamination. So this map here on the right, everything that is in red is actually soil that has levels of 400 ppm or higher. And right now there's no systematic map of New York City soil lead that's been created, but it is pretty much safe to assume that there are probably elevated levels. And this is due to the deposition of leaded gasoline over the years in highly trafficked areas, as well as lead in paint and the deposition of that through demolition and construction and all of that. So as you can see in the map, it is concentrated, or at least been tested quite a bit in northern Brooklyn, but also some parts of Staten Island and throughout Manhattan. So it's not just gardeners that are at risk, but residents that are at risk for exposure, especially kids. And one note is that lead cannot be broken down or effectively removed from the soil. A lot of times we see folks trying to plant sunflowers and do kind of phyto remediation work, but it's best to just bring in clean soil that you know has no to very little levels of lead. So throughout this presentation, I'll be talking about clean soil, and that's what I'm referring to. One way to kind of know what your levels are right now is to get tested through the Urban Soil Institute, and they provide tests if you wanted to kind of get a sense of what your level is right now. And so an example of a farm that actually has imported soils and is growing in 100% DSNY, Department of Sanitation compost, is actually Red Hook Urban Farm. So this farm right here, it's actually, like I mentioned, in Red Hook, Brooklyn, across from the IKEA in Brooklyn. And they have about a foot of that they've basically imported compost into. And it was an old baseball field that was converted into this urban farm that has a great educational mission. But something to note about these soils is that they have very high organic matter, lots of compost, as I mentioned. In this case, it's all compost. Limited soil structure, they often are not very deep. They may dry out quickly, and they tend to have a really high pH. We see pH of like 7 to 7.5, and they don't need a lot of phosphorus, calcium, or magnesium, but they usually do need a bit more nitrogen and potassium. And then something else about urban soils, we do our urban soil survey, primarily SAM, through Agro One. So we have on our website information about how to access, how to basically tailor, how to interpret your test results when you get them back. But you could order a soil test that will look at pH, organic matter, nutrients, macro and micronutrients. And just a note about these high organic matter soils is that the nutrient results may be inflated. So just kind of taking that into account when you're trying to interpret your results. And a few considerations for container growing, you want to look at what containers are safest to grow in. In some cases, there have been some concerns about used tires, so you want to be careful about that. You also want to be careful about not using treated wood. That is definitely something that Green Thumb, that's part of the Parks Department in New York City, definitely advocates against using is treated wood for raised beds. And also just looking at what's accessible. Throughout the pandemic, the Grow NYC JetBlue terminal urban farm actually had all these milk crates, as you can see in this bottom photo. And so during the pandemic, there wasn't anybody to take care of the farm. And so they distributed all these milk crates throughout New York City to urban farms that wanted containers. So that's just an example of getting plugged into like what is accessible, what do you have around that you could easily grow into. And so in this case, they lined it with landscape fabric, and then it's probably DSNY compost as well that's being filled with them. But you also want to consider proper drainage and irrigation. As I mentioned before, they do dry out quickly. So you just want to plan ahead for that. Other container examples. So the left photos here are actually from our ginger trials last year. We're repeating those trials this year. The photo in the middle is actually my backyard. I decided to do ginger just to kind of see how it did in my backyard. We chose container ginger because it does well in partial shade, and a lot of the spaces throughout New York City are shaded partially because of nearby buildings and all of that. So that's just an example of picking a container crop that would grow well given your urban setting. The middle photo is a landscape fabric bag. That's also an option. And then the photo here is actually Hell's Kitchen Farm Project, and they use kiddie pools. So this is an example of a creative sort of repurposed use. And as you can see, it's all like caged in. And so this helps with pests like all the other urban pests that I mentioned before. And it's also caged in the top as well. And then other considerations, you want, again, built-in pest pressure, just like with the kiddie pools that I just showed. This is actually a farm in Flint, Michigan, and their pest protection actually lifts up, so it makes it easily accessible. They have this cage. They have an issue with, I think it was groundhogs on their urban farms. Another note is that it is accessible by height, so it makes it easier to work in. It's located directly across from a hospital. So if there are people that are interested in either picking vegetables or getting involved with the project, it's easier on their bodies. Another example is having built-in season extension. As you can see in the bottom right, these kind of hoop structures are sort of built into the raised beds, and then you can quickly put floating row cover over them as the season winds down. And then other examples, I'd like to hear in the chat, what other containers have you tried, or materials have you used for raised beds? As you can see in this middle picture right here, this is actually raised bed on a rooftop, and then a cold frame structure that just goes right over it. You could also have built-in trellising systems. And then I actually helped a friend build out a cold frame. So that top photo there was just materials that they had in their shed. and they had an old pulley system. So we attached it to the door, and then it was, you could easily lift it up and down. And what's great about a cold frame is that it helps with hardening off seedlings. And that really helps in certain windy conditions on rooftops to just make sure that you're acclimating the plants so that they do the best that they can. Yeah, we're coming up to the end. So other raised beds, this photo here on the left is actually Randall's Island Urban Farm, and they used some cement blocks to kind of make herb spiral garden. The middle photo is actually a company that makes these raised beds. They are kind of pricey, but they're guaranteed to last like 25 years or something. Something to note about pricing out raised bed structures, like we mentioned earlier about landscaping, sometimes it's a big upfront cost, but then you'll save money in the long run because you're not replacing the wood. So it's something to consider when you're looking at different options. And then the photo here on the right, this is actually in Europe. I thought it was interesting. It was this old stone wall that had fallen over. And so they just decided to make it into these, little raised beds all throughout. So it's just an interesting way to kind of deal with an issue that you find. Then other rooftop growing examples. If you are on a rooftop and let's say you don't have the capacity to bring in a lot of imported soils, there's structures out there using landscape fabric and sort of like cages to kind of build on top of rooftops. So this is actually an example in Paris, actually. It's a rooftop. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, it's actually a rooftop on top of a like shopping center. And so there's actually a gardening store at the bottom, and then you can go up to the rooftop and see, what's growing. The middle photo here is actually an urban farm as part of a residence, and they have these structures, sort of these trays that they put out. So it's sort of an example of like a modular system. This bottom left photo is actually Brooklyn Grange. It's a green roof. So it's just an example of sort of pollinator pasture for their urban farm. The top photo here is a Staten Island urban farm, and they use these sort of raised bed structures that are easy to manage and you don't have to bend. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind. And that's all I have. This is my contact information, and you can follow us on Instagram. If you go to Harvest New York and sign up for our newsletter, we often post upcoming events and any announcements.
Thanks, Yolanda.
Yeah.
You have some questions in here. Meanwhile, Deb, could you post the, or I can post the post test so people can fill that out so that they're eligible for the thumb drive. But so there's some of the questions about what kinds of containers and in terms of plastic pots. One was about joint compound buckets.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And the other one is about whether or not all plastic pots are toxic.
That's a good question. I don't know about plastic pots. I feel like if they're designed to be, growing to have edible crops, then they should be fine. The things that I would be wary about that I referenced were like treated wood, and then like old materials. Like I've seen urban farms like throughout the country whenever we go to conferences that use old tires, and that's something that you want to avoid. But I'm not sure about all plastic.
So in the joint compound buckets, to me, the question is how well can you clean it out, and can you get it to the point where there's no potential for whatever it was used for? If it's leached into the plastic, that would be an issue. And then if it's going to leach out somehow into your soil is another one. You have a question about other states and cities have urban ag programs. Do you network with them to exchange ideas that might benefit each other?
We do actually. The photo of, I think I mentioned an urban farm in Flint, Michigan. That's part of the IPM, the Great Lakes IPM working group. And that was a great conference that we held a couple of years ago, where we did a lot of tours in Detroit. So that was great to kind of network with other people.
You have a question about doing vermicomposting?
I don't see a lot of farmers doing that. It's definitely something that I think could happen more often, but there's just not a lot of examples, at least commercial urban growers that I know are doing it. Probably gardeners, but I'm not familiar with many.
And then also Janice said, I work with a community garden. They are looking for recommendations for alternatives to peat moss. Coconut fiber is too expensive for community gardens to use for its beds.
So that's to fill the raised beds.
I think so, yeah. Or to mix in with the soil mix somehow. Compost.
Yeah, so New York City Department of Sanitation, if you are, let's say, a Green Thumb garden, you have access to these resources. So you have to fill out a request form for supplies and equipment through your Green Thumb garden coordinator. And they do provide compost and potting soil. And yeah, so if you're looking for materials, as like I mentioned, the Red Hook urban farm example grows in straight compost. So it is possible. And other farmers, that's just what they have access to because that's what they can get in for free. So.
And I think one of the issues too is, you have to figure out what's available where you are, and it's not always going to be the same. That's sometimes one of the hard pieces. A question on crop rotation for community garden raised beds is a good one. It goes back to what some of the topics yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the farmers actually do struggle with that. It's something that they try to do their best, but yeah, it doesn't always happen like they would like, just because space is so limited.
You got a question on squirrel or raccoon protection ideas. I don't think you mean protecting the squirrels or raccoons. I have a feeling they're looking at the gardens.
Right, protecting against them. I think similar to what I showed with the kiddie pools, kind of how it has that cage and then that cage just comes out. You kind of lift it up and you take it out every time you want to harvest or work in that garden. So I would think something like that would work well, sort of that chicken wire cage.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? Look back to see. A lot of people like the pool idea.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Yolanda.